Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. My name is Anna Petts. I'm the Program Coordinator for Characterising South Australia's cover, and I have the pleasure of working with Steve and Neville and the rest of the team to help bring together this bulletin, or at least be at the end stages of it. So at first I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. As guests here on Kaurna land and with fieldwork that has taken place on Adnyamathanha, Wilyakari and Arabara lands, the Department for Energy and Mining acknowledges everything this department does impacts on Aboriginal country, the sea, the sky, its people and the spiritual and cultural connections which have existed since the first sunrise. Our responsibility is to share our collective knowledge, recognise a difficult history, respect the relationships made over time and create a stronger future. We are ready to walk, learn and work together. Okay, so firstly I'd like to introduce our MC for today's launch and workshop. Reg Nelson probably doesn't need much of an introduction to this crowd especially. And also we do know that he has a room here named after him, so anyone who's a regular visitor to Core Library. Reg has over 50 years of experience in the petroleum and mineral industries, and he was the Managing Director and Chief Executive of Beach Energy from 1995 to 2015, and former Chair of the Australian Petroleum Production and Exploration Association, where he received APIA's Red Sprig Gold Medal Award for outstanding services to the Australian oil and gas industry. So please join me in welcoming Reg as his MC for today.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks very much indeed. And it's certainly a pleasure for me to see so many familiar faces, some colleagues I haven't seen for years. So thank you all for coming. And in particular, of course, thanks to the authors, Neville, Ali, Steve Hoare, who's looking not quite so flustered now, but hang in there. And in particular, our invited speakers today. So we have, first of all, I'll introduce Paul Heithersay, and I think Paul would like to say a few words, and then I'll run through some of the program today and introduce some of our guest speakers. Paul?
Thanks, Reg. Minister Kutantonis sends his best regards. He would have liked to have been here today, but he is a very busy guy at the moment. But I think it's fair to say that when we, in our regular weekly meeting with him, we plonked those Bulletin 57 volumes on his desk, and he said, "This is exactly what I want the Geological Survey to do." So that was a great, indication of where he's at. He's tasked us as part of our strategic plan, really, with three things. One is to get the minerals production to the point where we're delivering $1 billion annually in royalties. That's sort of a double or triple what we're doing now. He wants the best geological survey in Australia, and he wants the best regulators in Australia. That's the strategy. So that's not a bad place to start for a mines department, I guess. And Bulletin 57 is a classic example of what that means. You know, it's one of the outputs that a geological survey in the broad should do. So congratulations to Neville, to Steve, and then in brackets Larry Frakes as well. We were just talking about it earlier on that this journey started quite a long time ago, and it's been a whole of geological survey effort, and certainly a lot of out of hours effort and a lot of commitment, and it just sort of highlights the way that the geological survey in South Australia works. It's a lot of committed people who get the job done. The thing for me too, reading this last night again, what does it do? What does it say to me? Well, it just tells me that field geology still matters. It always has, always will. You know, the Bulletin 57 is a field geologist's guide in many ways. There's a bit of fancy stuff in there, a bit of dating, a bit of clever science. But at the end of the day, it's people wandering around, banging on rocks, and suddenly getting an idea. Well, we used to call it this. It's actually something else completely, and the whole picture changes. I remember talking to Erwin Scheibner. I don't know if people know him, but he was the great tectonic geologists in New South Wales who really brought plate tectonics to Australia. But everybody used to sort of get upset with him because the models seemed to change all the time. But I remember him telling me once, well, you can go to one outcrop and the whole thing can change immediately, you know. That's the magic of getting out in the bush and having a look and testing the hypothesis. And, you know, we've got to rely on very, very few data points. And so it's no wonder things can change, and it can lead to a big volume like that, which is sort of reinterpreting South Australian geology, and it has implications for climate change, for the way paleogeography, fascinating. I've always been fascinated by paleogeography, and it has direct impacts on the way we deal with mineralisation, particularly uranium exploration. It just expands the search space for that particular commodity overnight. So congratulations to Steve and Neville. Great effort to see a volume like this. Congratulations to the Geological Survey for helping publish this. And let's think together and work together as to how do we make the Geological Survey. I mean, I think it already is the best in Australia, and many would agree with me. But if we're going to take it up a notch or two, what do we do? How do we do that? So congratulations again, and I look forward to the rest of the meeting. Thanks, Reg.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Importantly, this has had great implications for, as Paul has indicated, mineralisation, particularly uranium. So Anthony Hewitt from Heathgate is here, and he will talk about how this study has been an impact there. On that basis, I just want to say a few words about the history of the bulletins to begin with. It's over 110 years since the first bulletin was published, and that was Lockhart Jack, and that was significant. 1912, it reflected the necessities of the state at that time, so it was special reference to underground water supplies. And for most of the early years, the bulletins that were published dealt with those pressing necessities, whether it was water resources, building materials, agricultural, and other vitally needed commodities. And probably 60% of the 56 bulletins issued up to this point, we're here at Bulletin 57, of course, have dealt with things like that. But in later years, it's really been the work of the broader geology of SA that's fostered the development, for example, of new mineralisation models, a better understanding of the geological framework. And to me, that's what makes a geological survey so important. It can have a profound influence on exploration today for vitally needed critical mineral resources, exploration for the future indeed. Probably the first bulletin to really address broader regional geology would have been Ralph Segnet's 1939 bulletin, I think it was Bulletin 18, which really dealt with the Precambrian-Cambrian succession. Others probably more focused on specific regions, followed over the next few years. In 1987, Wolfgang Price put together a compilation of investigations into what we then called the Adelaide Geosyncline. And for me, that was a magnificent, broad, sweeping view of a Southern Australian world of rocks. Bulletin number 54 followed in 2 volumes, and that was a panoply of South Australian geology. So these broader studies have really underpinned much of our present understanding of the structural evolution of Southern and Central Australia. They've also had global implications as well as in stimulating exploration for minerals and energy resources. South Australian geology really has had a global impact, if you think about it. The 2 major worldwide glaciations that really define the Cryogenian period are the Sturtian, after Sturt Gorge, the Maranoan, or maybe it should be the Alatna, but be that as it may, these are all names with South Australian connotations. And certainly where I now live, I'm surrounded by rocks of the apatitellite formation of Sturtian age. And after due consideration, Neville, of Chapter 3, I'm indebted to you and Steve for a better understanding of the numerous forms of tillite you can get. The Cryogenian was only really recognised as recently as 1990. The Ediacaran that followed in terms of naming was 2004. And both are represented here around us. They're South Australian. I think South Australia can certainly claim to have given the world Snowball Earth. Well, today I say very confidently that Neville's and Steve's recognition of early Cretaceous glaciation in their North Flinders investigations may well prove to be another contribution from South Australia that has global implications. Given the contributions made over the last 110 years by the bulletins, it's sad that it's faltered until now. From 1912 to 1931, bulletins were published at the rate of about one per year. We had the Great Depression, and it wasn't really till 1939 that they started again. And from then, probably till 1987, there was a new bulletin every 2 years. Then it slowed to one every 7 years, then one every 10 years. And it's now nearly 15 years since the last was issued, and that was Bulletin 56 on the soils of southern Australia. So that's sad. Why do I say sadly? You could well counter this by saying that it's a 20th century concept. Who needs voluminous hard copies of bulletins? But that's not my point. We live in a time where people look for instant gratification. Yes, it's good to fly airborne geophysical surveys, release ideas and models to simulate ideas. I'm all for it. My own career will attest for that. But we also need the dedicated research that only years of effort and wrangling with different hypotheses can deliver, supporting and patiently nurturing this work with the objective of publishing in some form a framework for new ideas. And it doesn't have to be in hard copy, but that should always be part of a good geological survey. So now it's with great delight we're here today to launch Bulletin 57. It's a magnificent body of research. Over many years, it's required painstaking, meticulous data gathering and analysis with field testing of hypotheses. Certainly over my long professional association with Neville Alley and observing Steve and Neville in the field all too briefly, I can certainly attest to their dedication. Neville and Steve have provided guiding thoughts for each volume. I'm sure they'll talk about this later. For Volume 2, they very aptly quote Conan Doyle's exhortation, never to theorise before assembling all of the facts. So, with detectives in mind, it's worth quoting a bit more Sherlock Holmes. The ideal detective has the power of observation and that of deduction. He's only wanted in knowledge. Data, 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 he cried impatiently. I can't make bricks without clay. So, as technology evolves and our ability improves to get data of higher quality and better resolution, the small and subtle details that emerge from this can have real significance. For us as explorers, the noise is often caused by the surface cover, the regolith. But is there signal embedded in that noise? Is the regolith the clay for Sherlock's bricks? Again, Sherlock, I'm glad of all details, whether they seem to you to be relevant or not. If you look at the complexities of conducting Neville's and Steve's work, it would have been extremely challenging. Tectonic events have been a feature of North Flinders ranges during much of the time when sediments were deposited along the margins. Facies variation is highly complex. Hiatuses, as Holmes would say, the curious incident of the dogs that didn't bark in the night. They can be local as well as regional. So clearly our geological detectives have worked hard to provide, as they say, intriguing insight into the sea levels and paleo environments existing at various times during the early Cretaceous. The resulting landforms are themselves a reflection of climate, geology and predominantly near-surface geomorphic processes, and in itself they are clues to the nature of the regolith. The regolith, that surface covering of 75% of the state. It's been a constant challenge and a lot of swearing for people looking to explore beneath it. It can reflect the immediate underlying bedrock, or a local source, or a distant, or a combination of all three, or local geochemistry. But maybe, here's a thought, embedded in this there's the equivalent of a geological DNA coded within it. If you can break the code, you might find new things, and that is, I think, part of, a very large part of what Steve and Neville have done. Of course, the regolith itself can host critical resources. The Bulletin's conclusions are regionally, certainly, even globally significant. They have implications for mineral and petroleum exploration and also vital groundwater resources. It will certainly be a great aid in understanding what controlled fluvial systems and sedimentation in the Cenozoic. Certainly implications for strategically important resources like uranium, lithium, potash, even rare earth elements. We now have a better understanding also of basin evolution, and certainly the newly constructed sea level curve for the early Cretaceous will have implications for the Eromanga Basin and basins beyond.